And on to our next film, which has done actually quite well in the nominations and awards so far. 1917 by Sam Mendes, directed by Sam Mendes. Jim, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what this film's all about?
So, as the title of the film kind of gives away, it's set during the First World War, and basically we are following two British soldiers stationed in France who are given a task at the start of the film, and it turns out that basically the Germans have retreated from the front lines, and an assault is being planned by British forces elsewhere. And the forces that are going to be launching that assault include the brother of one of the soldiers that we follow, which is Lance Corporal Blake, played by Dean Charles Chapman, who's probably better known to folk as Tommen Baratheon, or at least I think it is. I haven't actually bothered to look this up, but he certainly looks like him. And the other one is Lance Corporal Schofield, played by George Mackay, who is chosen by Blake to go with him. And basically, the shtick for the film, right, is that it's a single take. Now, it's not actually a single take. I think the longest individual take is about 9 minutes, I've read, and then it's kind of got special effects wizardry to stitch it together. But basically, we follow them crossing no man's land, going out into the countryside, encountering, other soldiers, opposition forces, and basically the trials that they need to overcome in order to deliver this message from their commanding officer to the other commanding officer. And it deals a lot with the horrors of war and the things that were encountered, and kind of maybe some of the politics within British forces at the time, maybe even today. And basically that's the thing. We follow them on that journey as a kind of an uninterrupted journey, effectively. Directed by Sam Mendes, who's done quite well in terms of box office lately. He did a couple of Bond films and so forth. The cinematographer is Roger Deakins, of course, so you can imagine the film looks very good. But I suppose we've all seen it here, so I'm curious as to what you thought about it, because obviously it's a very big technical undertaking, and it's a very sort of like impactful story in time. So what did you make of it?
Well, I have to admit that I saw it right after Little Women and was bawling my eyes out of happiness with Little Women. So I was also not incredibly excited to see this film because I knew it was going to be depressing. One thing I have to say is this idea of the gimmick film of the one take. I'm ready for that whole idea to be over. Was it Birdman that started it? I think Orson Welles was quite fond of the long take, but the idea that this film has to be one take and that's why it's getting all this buzz is annoying to me. And so I watched the film through that lens of being like, there's another one, and that frustrated me a bit. But having said that, I was able to get immersed in the story, and I think I didn't expect. So the positives of it is that I didn't expect to feel. It almost felt like a tense horror film to me in a bit, and so it was. There were many times in the theater that I kind of gasped, and so I quite enjoyed that take on a war film versus others that I've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supposed one take is never going to not be a gimmick. I do have an issue with films that end up playing upon this sort of one idea. It's this one story that pops up in the news. It's the one thing that sort of gets it that initial media attention. And to a certain extent, I think it sort of ends up undervaluing everything else that's maybe going on in the film. I think that being said, the one take for this film does make sense to a certain extent because of that kind of relentlessness of war and this long journey that they're going on and that sort of inability to ever just take a break. Like, you can't just turn off and stop paying attention in war. And I think it shows that through some of the things that happen in the film, that if you turn away your attention, you forget where you are, you forget what context you're in, you can maybe end up making quite a wrong footing. I appreciated the film. I enjoyed it. I found it entertaining. I must say I did have quite a laugh at the number of times where George McKay's character would maybe arrive at a new regiment, encounter a new group of people, and there seemed to be this trope continuing of every time he went to find the person he was looking for, they would have their back to him, they would turn around, and they would be some incredible member of like male British actor glitterati. Like, we were sitting there thinking, like, who else can come up? Like, is Charles Dance going to appear? Like, where's Hugh Grant? I mean, we decided there were a lot of people that were probably off in head offices and not necessarily on the battlefield. But I mean, literally, you can make a drinking game out of it. Like, everyone is in it. And I think they probably had a lot of fun making it as bleak as the final result is on film. I think some of those swooping shots as they kind of go through the trenches and pick their way through the battlefield are probably a lot of fun for Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins to shoot. And also a shout out to Christy Wilson-Cairns, who co-wrote the film with Sam Mendes, who is a Glasgow-born female writer who I think we should be keeping our eyes on. I think she's co-writing Edgar Wright's new film with him. Definitely keep an eye on her for when she gets to write a film by herself.
So, well, I've actually seen the film just yesterday, and I have to say I was pretty taken by the film, and also all this idea of like the one take, which to me is not really a one take, maybe like a couple of takes. But anyway, let's not debating on that. And I mean, first of all, I usually don't read anything about a film before going to watch that, so I pretty much didn't know anything about this film. On top of being like a film set in the First World War, just because it's like 1917. So, I mean, as I said, I was really, really engrossed by the way it's like shot, and I think that like the one take thing really interesting, and quite a great way of like dealing with like what you can experience like in war, as Carice was saying, and also it added like to the a kind of a sense of suspense to the scenes, and then the idea of like not knowing what could have happened like just a second later, because I mean the field of vision for like the viewers is like not really wide, so you can't see what's happening like in the background, or like in a field like half meter from the characters. So that was really intriguing. But then when I went home, just like logged on Twitter and then had a look at like what people were starting to say about the film, and I found this tweet, and it was like, finally a movie that accurately represents World War I as a smooth and continuous experience of exciting thrills and action. And well, I mean, World War I wasn't really thrill and actions. It was like a stale war. Basically, everyone was like in the trenches, not moving, and pretty much dying of like of agony, and like not an accurate representation maybe of like what the First World War was. But then at the same time, it was really great to see that like on a screen. So I'm kind of now I'm debating with myself: should I have liked this film or not? What should be like my take on this film? So I don't know, I'm just doubting myself, but at first I was really enjoying that, and I thought it was a great film.
So I think the technical details, the whole... First off, I'm glad that Serena said that we're not going to debate whether it was a single take or not, because I'm not willing to debate it. It was not a single take. It appears as two takes, but that doesn't make for as good marketing. But you know, let's move on. But that aside, I do think it was quite well done in that respect, and it was really impressive. And I agree with Carice in that it does to me make thematic sense. It's a continuous journey. It's very unrelenting in that sense. It's a very tense film. It's quite stressful in that way, and I think that puts you into that situation quite well with that technique. So whilst it is a bit of a gimmick, I do think it works very well here, and it also allows a different way of kind of like setting up your understanding of spaces and scenes. So the film opens with on the two of them having a nap, I think, and basically it tracks them. You know, the camera's moving backwards and they're moving forward through a field through their company, and it's kind of beautifully done how like little details come into the frame. You can start to see the rest of their company around them, and then you start to move into kind of a darker space where they're then given their mission by their commanding officer. And that respect is very well done. It is very meticulously thought out, and I think it adds to the way you engage with the film. Where my problem with it comes in, maybe in the minority in this room on that, but we'll see, is whilst I found technically the storytelling very good and it involved me in kind of the physical action that was going on, I really didn't get a sense of any character on screen. It felt a little bit to me like when you combine that technique of trying to make it appear continuous with the moving through different spaces and kind of encountering different people along the way, and some wild coincidences, which are, you know, I mean, they make for nice symbolism, but I mean, it does to me take me out of the film a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, it felt a little bit like a video game to me at points. It has that same kind of like continued, it's got, I don't know if anybody here has ever played any of these like open world computer games, but it felt like that sort of thing where you're going through a landscape and then you'll encounter a non-player character and there'll be a little thing that happens and then you move on whilst you're trying to do a bigger mission, but there's like these little side missions. And in that respect, it actually kind of, over time, it took me out of the film. Like, the continuous take, it started off excellently and really kind of informed the way that they were building spaces, but after a while, it didn't really add to anything. I will say the film looks incredible. I'm a fan of Roger Deakins anyway, and it's kind of like, his trademark now seems to be fires in the dark. Right, or like orange light, like Blade Runner 2049 had that, Skyfall, like that seems to be his thing at the moment. But it looks incredible, and there's one scene in particular, which I think is in the trailer, where George Mackay's running around in kind of like a set of abandoned buildings. There's a fire raging, there's flares going off. It looks incredible. The main thing for me is the characters of Blake and Schofield. I never really got a feel for them. You know, why did he have? It almost felt like the reason that you needed to have Blake's brother a part of the company that they're going to is because there's not really much woven in about why they would be so motivated to do this. And there is a little bit of a hint to basically the shit show that was World War I in terms of organisation and like motivation of the forces for this conflict. And it feels like basically the only reason they made it his brother is because that's what would motivate them to do it. So it kind of introduces to me character motivation, not issues, but an absence of them. Beyond, like, you don't really get much of a sense of what these characters want beyond survival. Now, maybe that is thematically consistent with the way it's shot, but it does mean that over time, I think you start to be slightly less involved in the characters, because once you've settled into the storytelling rhythm that is set up by this continuous take, stuff starts to fade a little bit. It's only when you get towards the end and there's a very spectacular set piece that involves a company going over the top where that then kind of like pulled me back into the film. So it's a case of it does constantly pull you back in, but the reason it needs to do that is because it does, for me anyway, it did slowly lose me over stretches before it then wrenched me back into it.
See, for me, the idea of World War I has always been that it's so confusing and was always something that like art responded to, in the sense that it was absolutely heart-wrenching and confusing and kind of and almost unexplainable. And in some way, I disagree with you in the sense that I felt for those characters a lot, actually, at the beginning. And I felt the motivation to be in an environment where you don't know why you're doing it. You're just being told to do something and to go through these trenches. And it felt with the way it was shot, as you said, with Roger Deakins, I thought it was really stunning in that way, because I really did feel for these people who probably had no particular motivation. And then when they were in the German bunkers, they were realizing those people probably had very similar sort of things. And just by the fact that, like, accidentally some plane comes by and stabs him, that's kind of war, and I gathered that in the sense that, like, it's by accident whether or not you survive or you don't.
But that's almost kind of what my issue was with it. It has these moments. It has these moments where there'll be a little sign in a trench, or there'll be something with some detail, which then maybe speaks to a slightly deeper analysis of this than war is horrible, right? But because of the way the film is telling its story, you have no time to linger on these things. It's right, okay, on to the next thing. We need to get them to, we need to get them to the cherry orchard, right? We need to get them to the farmhouse, right? We need to get... It's, in a way, it doesn't give itself an opportunity to deal with these things. And I think by putting in these little details in there, it does want to do that. but it doesn't quite get the room to breathe. And I understood, I did feel for the characters. More what I'm getting at is you don't really get any sense of an inner self. And there are basically a moment for each of those main characters, Blake and Schofield, where you get more of a sense of them as people. So there's one moment with Blake, and then there's another one kind of like a little bit later on. Actually, Schofield gets a couple, I would say. But they're so few and far between because we don't get the opportunity to really sit with those characters all that long. Like the camera goes in for a close-up, but it's barely there for that long, because before you know it, we're pulling back to a medium shot and we're on the move again. So to me, it's a difficult one because I find myself very split on this film. I do think there's a lot to recommend it, but it's just I didn't get as emotionally involved with it as I feel the film wanted me to.
Actually, I've kind of disagreed on that point because I actually felt like I was like connected with the characters, and I mean I get I don't get the whole idea of a war to begin with, but I kind of got the idea of like having to do something because you were ordered to do something, and then you're trying to find like the motivation to do that. And in that case for Blake was like to save his brother, which is like perfectly fine in that kind of environment. You wanting to find like a kind of a bigger reason, or like just a motivation to do that, because you don't want to die for no reason or for a war you're not even interested in to begin with. So I found that really, really gripping, and like you can connect with that. It's a feeling we all share, kind of, even though we're not in that situation. And the idea of like having these kind of quests, I think, I mean, it was like in the mission itself. I mean, it's obviously basically the only thing that gets you going is like adrenaline. So you're trying to do something, you basically running out of time, you're running against time. So obviously it's like you're kind of splitting your journey into a series of like little quests. And yes, it's a video game in the end, okay, we know that. But then, I mean, just you have to do something as a first step, and then there's another step, and obviously it's end up being like a sequence of like quests and stuff to get to the end game, which is like saving your brother, saving like all the battalion and everything. And just to go back just a tiny bit on the one shot thing. At first I was really sold, and I thought it was like just a thing for like setting up the scene, and I thought, oh my god, that's great, that's amazing, because you were kind of introducing the setting and like slithering in the trenches, and that was amazing. And then you get to the first general, and then you've got, for just a brief second, it's like a subjective shot, and then it turns like into like objective shot. It was just great, and I was like, oh, amazing, just some amazing way to start a film. And then when I figured out that, oh my god, that's the film, just 1 or 2 shots, I was like, that's a tiny bit of a bravado here. I mean, that's a man like directing the film, so who could have known? I mean, yeah, amazing. And in the end I was like, as I said, like really enjoying the film, but maybe in hindsight I should maybe change my mind on something. But anyway, I felt like really connected on an emotional level. So yeah.
I actually, the single take thing, right? I think that just I need to say that to me, Serena's nailed it there, because I actually think that, like, we talk about kind of like creativity coming out of restrictions, right? I actually think that Sam Mendes has ended up doing the opposite here, right? Because the long take was a very good way of setting up the space, the characters, introducing us to the world, and I think it really did work beautifully there. But I actually think that basically he is then later in the film, and this maybe speaks to why I didn't engage with the characters as much, I actually think he's ended up restricting the visual language that he can use there a little bit. That's, to me, it does seem like that technical gimmick, and we'll call it a gimmick, because I mean, as the film goes on, I do think it is, has restricted the way that he can tell the story visually after that. And I think that could be the reason why I didn't engage with it as deeply as I maybe could or should have.
I think it is a gimmick, and then while we've been talking, kind of had to look back at why I remembered the long take as such a big thing. And it started, one film I remember it from was Atonement, and he had that one famous really long take that was beautiful, that kind of showed the horror of war happening in France. I feel like I'm watching the same, that's my problem, I'm watching this Dunkirk, and I'm watching, which is a video game in its own way. It's just structured differently. And then I'm watching this film, which is a journey, you know, like a journey, and it's a video game over and over and over again. And it's good. It's enjoyable. People seem to enjoy it in the audience. I enjoyed it. I had a thrill ride. But is it amazing? I don't know.
So noting that it just picked up the BAFTA for Best Drama Film, do they categorize by? Yeah. So Best Drama Film of the last year. Oscar predictions. Do we think that it stands a chance to win the big award?
Well, I don't know. I actually bring that's a really good point to bring up, because I thought it was interesting watching the Golden Globes. I stayed up all night. I was shocked that Netflix got completely snubbed for everything. I really thought Irishman was going to, because honestly, I haven't seen The Irishman in its full, but the way that Jim and Luca were talking about it being so incredibly amazing, I was shocked. So I was expecting 1917 had to be quite good.
Well, yeah, but Joker, like, you know, Luca was also in love with Joker, so I'm going to say you should take everything that Luca or I said with a pinch of salt, perhaps.
I mean, I think of the films that are currently being placed in the Big Picture Award from predictions, so that's the likes of 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker, and Parasite are currently the big names out there. I've actually regrettably not seen Parasite yet. I'm really looking forward to it. I hear lots of good things. I think it would be incredible if it did sweep up the Best Picture award from what I've heard, but I think it's unlikely. I think the second a film finds itself in the, is it non-English language they're calling the category now? They've changed it recently. The second a film finds itself in that category as well, I think people just defer. They say, well, I'll vote for it in that category. I don't need to vote for it in the big picture category, which is unfortunate. But I think of of 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Joker, I personally would want to put my vote behind Joker. I think although all three of those films are fairly kind of seen it before male narrative, sorry to keep man bashing Jim, Joker at least is something that tries to bring a little bit of something else. You know, I think it handles the topic of mental health really interestingly. I think it handles the topic of budget cuts to health provisions, which is obviously an issue that's going to increasingly face the UK over the next couple of years. And to be honest, I think after the year of films we've had, it's kind of depressing that 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I mean, come on, and Joker, the films that are being put up there. Yeah.
Well, it would be nice if Little Women would get something in there.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think by the time we get to the Oscars, Little Women probably will. Also, I'm pleased that as we continue to do more shows into 2020, we continue to have somebody flying the flag for Joker, just to sort of like, you know, test my patience about how much I want to like go on about that.
Have you heard that Joker 2 is getting ever increasingly more likely?
I mean, the minute it crossed $1 billion, it became a certainty. One that I will go view along with everybody. Honestly, that film just annoys me so much. But I'm a little bit. I feel like we've kind of bizarrely for a year where we've got quite a lot of like interesting films, and I have seen Parasite, and I think it's excellent. Of the kind of like the big candidates kicking around, I would probably give it to Parasite or The Irishman. But put it this way, if Parasite won it, I think that would be an excellent choice. I find it a little bit depressing how many films that were awarded, particularly at the Golden Globes, you know, which splits its Best Picture category. How many of them are kind of like typical things you'd expect? So 1917 won. We've discussed 1917. You know, it's a very good film, but I mean, it's another one of these kind of like classic awards-friendly films. It's a war film. It's got a technical gimmick that kind of like, you know, filmmakers will kind of look at, oh my God, that was, you know, incredible. There's that. And then the other winner in the other category was that famous musical or comedy, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you know. Yeah, that comedy where people get their heads stamped on, you know, hilarious. And, you know, we discussed that in the show. I wasn't sold on that at all. But
you didn't like that film then?
No,
Right.
I liked bits of it, but it felt... I have a very weird relationship with Tarantino's films, and that some I think are brilliant and others I think are very self-indulgent and overlong, and people kind of go nuts over it. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for me, was in that latter category. But it's another film. It's another film about films in Hollywood. I mean, we've done this before. I mean, this happened when when everybody went nuts during award season over The Artist, which
Or The Player.
Or La La Land.
well, exactly. This is my point. Like, it's just that this keeps happening again. And, like, a lot of these films aren't. I mean, The Artist. I'm sorry. Like, not that I want to open up. This probably.
Oh, you do. You want to.
Yeah. Okay. I do. Right. The Artist is not a good film. I do not like it. Right. It's a gimmick. It's a silent film. It doesn't use the same language as silent films, and it's got the same plot as Anchorman. Right. Go look at it. Watch both films back to back. It has the plot of Anchorman.
Once a year, we have to give Jim the artist conversation.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'll just combust. So, like, in terms of predicting like what will win, I don't know. I mean, I've got my choices, but I think it's going to default to that. I guarantee, for instance, that Best Original Screenplay will go to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That is absolutely going to happen, because I don't think Tarantino will get Director. I don't think it will get Best Picture. So he'll get that because, you know, it needs something.
Isn't he getting away with doing a 14th film by doing like Kill Bill 3, or is that a joke or something like that?
So he said he was going to retire after 10 films, right? But he's counting
10 perfect films, his words.
Oh, seriously? Christ. Well, it used to be 10 films, but he was getting away with this by counting Kill Bill as one film.
Yeah.
Well, I need to pay for 2 tickets, Quentin, so it's 2 films. Like, I had enough of this nonsense.
But I thought I heard he was going to do another sequel or something like that too, so he gets away with it again.
It's in pre-production, or at least it's listed on IMDb.
Interestingly, Jim, I noticed this week that you were tweeting about Alma Hariel's proposition that they should maybe split the directing category as her proposition. Maybe she considers that they should take it further into other categories, and you were sort of asking people to give their 2 cents on this, and also, I guess, questioning why it was only really the acting categories that had historically had this split. And I think when these categories were established, there weren't female directors, there weren't female producers of note, there weren't especially ones that were being positioned as the director. Potentially there's you know, co-directors and other people behind the scenes, but the acting category is the only one that they historically have accepted women have a right to be in, because someone's got to play women, and we can't carry on with the Shakespeare thing of men playing women forever. But I think the acting categories are definitely going to be quite interesting this year. There's so many incredible performances in, you know, big ensemble pieces. You've got Charlize Theron and Nicole Kidman and Margot Robbie in Bombshell. It's an opportunity for Margot Robbie to actually have a character, which she doesn't have in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She's just one of Tarantino's composite fetishes. If that even makes sense. Someone to take her shoes off and wiggle her tootsies around. But having watched Bombshell, I think she's incredible in that. She actually, funnily enough, is a composite character in that, so she sort of is the representative of all the young generation of women who maybe fell victim to Roger Ailes' sexual assaults and sexual advances. And then you've, of course, got all the incredible performances in Little Women. You've got all the incredible men in The Irishman. You've got Pesci, who I think it was quite sad that he lost out to Brad Pitt at the Golden Globes. But I think that's potentially the Netflix label dragging him down. Although I must say, if I'm going to give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood any credit, it's Brad Pitt. He made me laugh. I could play that scene over and over again where he gets pulled off on a stretcher. Away we go. But I think the acting categories, they've got a lot of really brilliant names, and interestingly, a lot of names of people who could be nominated for multiple different films this year.
Yeah, I think the Joaquin Phoenix is probably most likely to win. But incredible performances across all of these films, and you know, I was excited to see Laura Dern win for Marriage Story, because she was my favorite part of that film for sure. And I had a lot of discussions over whether Scarlett Johansson was actually a good actor performance for some friends who have seen it since then. That's an interesting take. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing. And unlike Jim and Serena, I do really, we'll talk about it next month, but I do like an Oscar. I like the Oscars a lot. So, and I do think they're relevant just because they're some way for us to fight and talk about it.
I know, I was more circumspect because the last time we did this, it was my first show and I was being accommodating and reining in my cynicism. No longer.
So by now you'll know the nominations and of the Oscars, and we can continue the conversation next month.